This is Love Never Fails with your host, Marilyn Redmond. Marilyn shares her experience, strength, and hope, and includes tools to help you find your inner strength for health, healing, and empowerment. So now, please welcome the host of Love Never Fails, Marilyn Redmond.
I am your host, Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails, and we are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. And I'm so glad to have you here and welcoming you today. And I know we have some new listeners too, so be sure that you call in with your questions today, 866-451-1451. We'll give you the best answers we can. And we know that you're out there listening with curious, interesting ideas, and so share them with us. Everybody would like to know what you're thinking too. It tends to come that way. When you're thinking about it, somebody else is too. So don't be shy. And we have been talking about holistic health for several weeks. We even had a guest on did Reiki a couple weeks ago, and we're going to be having another guest, not next week, but maybe it is next week. Anyway, the first of the next month, about prisons and helping people in that situation and understanding what that's about better. She works through the prison group in the Edgar Cayce Association, and we're going to talk about how we can help those people so they can have a better life. So we have a lot of wide range of topics here on this program. It's not just holistic health. We have other areas that we want to address also. In fact, I was talking with somebody just the other day, and they said, I want to hear more about your angel stories, and I sure have a lot of those to share. Then they said, well, are you going to put them in a book? So obviously, guess what? The next book coming out might just be about angel stories. I have discovered I probably have about 24 listed at this point if we put them on the air and put them in a book. So lots of interesting things have happened to me. Angels are all around me, and they're all around you all the time. So if you're interested in that kind of a topic, or empowerment, self-esteem, relationships, addictions, spirituality, past lives, people that have passed over in your life, I have some pretty interesting stories to go along with that. Educational issues. I taught school for 50 years, still do teaching. I am an artist of angels because I actually see them when they help me. And pets in your family. I love to paint pictures. They're marvelous. And family pictures. I love to paint my little great-grandson. He's adorable. And I also do channeling readings, which are psychic and tarot. So there's a lot of different topics, and you probably have a topic I haven't even thought of. So let me know what your ideas are. You can always email me at Marilyn, Marilyn, at angelicasgifts.com. So if you have a request for some topics, I'll be glad to address those. And obviously, if people are interested in different ideas than what I just listed, we're going to look at those too. If you're interested in our past shows we've had, they are archived on BBM Global Network, and you can click on my picture, and then you'll get some words coming up, and then click at the bottom of the words where it says Learn More. And then more words will show up, and click under Read More, and you'll see the archives for all the last shows. So if you're interested in what we've already talked about, they're still there, totally ready for you to click in and listen to the old shows too. So you can get some more understanding about how this holistic health works and comes together. Last week we talked about fear. And today we're going to talk about anger and resentments, because I am discovering how significant that is in our lives. And holistic health means we're going to bring balance and harmony and create a healthy life instead of looking at all the separate parts of our body and talking about, I have a heart problem, or I have a liver problem, or whatever. We move past that into looking at the whole part of our body, releasing the fears and the angers and the guilts, and move out of those illusions of darkness so that we can address the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of our lives. So instead of looking at the illness or that body part, we're going to look at the total person. And as we've said before, this is not new. It's over 2,500 years old. And we're taking a look at it again because it tends to be very effective, in my life anyway, and very reasonable compared to how some medications and that kind of thing are costing today. I happen to use flower essences with my clients, and compared to a drug, which these are pure energy, they last several months and very reasonable. So, there's some better options for our lives today that maybe you weren't aware of. And that's what we're trying to do today, is bring to you some new understanding that possibly you hadn't heard before. We have interesting information that's not in the general population yet. It's coming in, though. More and more people are waking up and realizing they have choice in their health decisions. And I choose, of course, to stay out of anything toxic or poisonous in my system, so I have a clear head to think, and I can be rational today and healthy. So, anger is something that's not necessarily understood on how we can actually deal with it in a way that's not going to be destructive in our lives. And I didn't even know I had anger for years. I actually my anger was so stuffed. I was raised in the early 40s, and in those days, children were seen and not heard. You're probably laughing. Kids are pretty vocal today. But I was seen and not heard. And I was also given the message, nice little girls do not get angry. So I was a nice little girl, I want you to know. I didn't know you could even get angry. I just was not even accepted, acknowledged. It was okay for my parents to get angry every night and fight. It was kind of like, instead of a lullaby, I had heard them fighting every night. And I didn't, of course, like that. A lot of difficult situations arose because of that situation. And I felt that they weren't there for me, but they were sure angry people. But I wasn't supposed to be. Just simmer down, Marilyn. That's how I was raised. And, so I was raised at the time when radio was popular, before television. And there was a ventriloquist on the radio called Edgar Bergen. And he had a puppet that he used. He had several, actually. The most famous was Charlie McCarthy, but Charlie McCarthy had a cousin, I guess you'd say, called Mortimer Schnurd. And Mortimer Schnurd used to sing a song, and the words were, "It pays to be ignorant, it pays to be ignorant, it pays to be ignorant, just like me." Well, I raised myself in that message for many, many years. And my head was in the ground like an ostrich. Of course, you know what happens to the rear end sticking out, and finally I had to take a look at that. So I discovered through coming into holistic health and spiritual lifestyle that love is a creative force and anger is a destructive force. And anger can actually lead to great destruction in various ways. I would like to read a quote from Edgar Cayce today, because this is what some people will have no idea. Until I read this, I was actually shocked, because I was pretty naive about anger. And he said, "Anger can destroy the brain as well as any disease, for it is itself a disease of the mind." And so as we're talking about this, we're going to be coming back and telling more about anger and resentment in your lives. I'm Marilyn Redmond. This is Love Never Fails, and we are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. I am your host, Marilyn Redmond. This is Love Never Fails. We're coming to you live from BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. And today we're talking about anger. And if you've had anger over and over, taking rent-free space in your brain, that becomes kind of a compulsion or obsession with you. That's called a resentment. You're feeling that same anger over and over again. And anger actually covers your fear. Most people obviously are going to have some kind of fear, but they don't go around talking about it. Socially, that seems to be, we don't really say, "I'm afraid of the spiders." People will kind of laugh. Spiders are little. And you don't normally say, "Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have a car accident." But people will have fears, and it's easier to let your anger cover the fear than to talk about the fear. So angry people will, in this case, sometimes stuff their anger. You don't necessarily going around saying, "I'm angry," and throw rage rages. But that's what happens with anger. It becomes a rage. And so actually, it's a very destructive emotion. And those are the emotions we talked about last week below the iceberg. What you don't see about yourself is actually running your life. And what happens with anger is you tend to push people away. If you're having trouble with friendships and relationships, you might want to look at your anger. We'll get to talking as this program goes on today, ways to release that anger in more appropriate ways so you can not have that anger and have better relationships. So accepting that you do have anger is really the beginning. You just have to handle it in a way that you understand it better and not, of course, project it onto others because they're not going to like that. So be sure you call in with your questions at 866-451-1451. Maybe you have some questions about angers and resentments in your life. We'd be glad to take your comments and your calls. Well, I have some stories here about anger and how it's affected me. I know today that anger was in my family history. I actually was in my house one day and I was kind of like plop, came down through the family generations, plop, down to another generation, plop, and the anger landed on my shoulder. And it was my turn in the family history genealogy to release the anger of the family. And I have been able to basically do that today, which it feels much better, of course, not having that anger. So anger is not necessarily just with you. It can be from your family, and you adopted it. Maybe you were a good sponge. I was a little kid and took everything in and thought it was my fault. I let it fall on my shoulders. I took responsibility, and I really had nothing to do with me, actually, in many cases. So I felt the anger of the family anyway. And of course, that acted out in my life. And I didn't know you could get angry at your higher power. I was at a meeting one day, and this person happened to say at the beginning of the meeting, well, I got angry at God this morning before I showed up here. And that just amazed me that you could get, well, I was a nice little girl that didn't get angry, right? So I went home that day. And I got in touch with God as far as my looking up at the ceiling and shouting and screaming, how could you put such an innocent little baby into such a dysfunctional family? And I didn't say it very prettily. So that was the first time I got angry, and I blurted it out nice and loud. I don't know why I look at the ceiling when I get angry, but I do when I shout about it. However, I've noticed that anger, what I've learned over the years, usually is from something in my past. But somebody right now did something and pushed the button to the past. So often when we're angry, it's not about what's going on right now. They are helping us to replay that memory or that feeling that we had a long time ago, and it's the old feeling pops in and we're just off and running, and that poor person's standing there wondering, what did I say, but it pushed the button to an old experience. And I had to learn, okay, where did this anger come from? And so I tried to dislodge all those buttons today, but I had one pop up just the other day. You don't, I think, get rid of all of them, but at least I didn't go into a terrible situation over it. I handled it pretty realistically compared to how I would have earlier in my life. So I don't need to justify anger with self-pity, judgment, self-righteousness, false pride, or false humility today, and hide behind those facades or those masks. And today, when I get angry, I can say, I'm really angry when that happens in a very neutral, calm way. That's the best way to express anger, is you take the emotion, all that vehement out of it, the intensity of the energy, and you bring it down into being a calm comment that you just say, like, I feel good. Well, you can say, well, yeah, I feel angry when that happens, or when that situation occurs, that makes me angry. And you don't have to get overextended about it or overreact about it. So I know that there's a spiritual axiom today that every time we're disturbed, no matter what the cause, there's something wrong with me. I cannot blame any more on other people. I was told if I'm pointing one finger at somebody else, there's three fingers pointing back at me. So I have learned to say when something goes amiss, okay, what did I send out? What was my energy I'm producing out that they reacted to? And it, of course, came back at me. So the anger is less and less in my life today. If I continue to get angry and I try to stuff that anger, I'm the one that's actually taking the poison, whatever, eating too much to stuff my feelings or alcohol or whatever. Overeating is a big one for a lot of people. So whatever you use to stuff your feelings, you're the one that is going to have the health problem. If you don't let go of that anger, it's going to provide a health problem. So it's pointless to be angry at others. They're suffering from the pains of growing up, just like I am, or other, we're all learning to grow up. That's what this planet is about. And so that's what I'm trying to help people to see, is that we don't have to stay in that angry type of emotion that's going to be detrimental to our health and well-being. I may not like the person that pushed my button, but I can accept the fact they're a mirror. And whatever I'm angry about, they're mirroring back to me. And they're showing me what I still need to look at in my life and maybe change or perhaps forgiveness, do something differently so it doesn't pop that button and to make me overreact. So I try to tell myself, how can I be helpful and try not to be angry and ask for God's will to be done because, as we say in the show, love never fails. And I am Marilyn Redmond. This is Love Never Fails, and we are coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. And stay tuned for more anger stories and how to resolve them. I am your host, Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails. We are coming to you on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Welcome back, and I know you want to hear more about how you can resolve the anger or resentments in your life. It's no longer necessary to carry them around, pass them on in your family to others, which is what happened to me, all that anger of their disappointments, their problems, their harms and abuses. They didn't deal with it, so guess who gets to deal with it in the family? I do. They didn't look at it. They ignored it. They pretended it wasn't there. The problem is with that, it gets actually grows and enlarges. It actually gets larger and they get more angry as time goes on. And so very angry people have had that anger for years and years. And so what I've learned is that you can be peaceful with those kind of people. As you learn what the anger is really about, we'll share that in a minute. Just stay tuned. We're going to be talking more about some angry stories first so you can see how it actually works so detrimentally in your life, and then we'll give you some solutions. So anger makes us sick. If we keep it, we get really sick. And there's reasons why people keep it because they're used to it. It's a comfort zone. They don't know how to change. If you don't change something, nothing's going to change. So people just stay in that comfortable place that they're used to. And finally, somebody has to say, this hurts. I'm going to do something different. And I hope that you people listening today are one of those people that say, I'm not going to continue the anger in my family. I'm going to change and start passing out love to the family. I'm going to look at it from a mature point of view than a little kid. And the anger doesn't have to cover my fears. Well, last week we got rid of our fears, so we don't need anger either because there's no fear to cover. So, don't scare people away with your anger. The past doesn't have to run your life anymore. Fear and anger is all from when we were growing up or when our parents were growing up, and we're carrying that with us and reliving all that history. Guess what? You can get off the victim cycle. You don't have to continue angers and resentments, guilt or revenge. We'll talk about those on other programs. But, we can say, I'm not willing to continue to play that game anymore. I'm not willing to pass it on to others because it hurts them and it hurts me and it makes me sick. I'm not going to blame others. I'll take responsibility for my life and do what I need to do and take care of it. Because if I'm harboring those angry feelings, I'm actually shutting off the love of the universe from manifesting in my life. And believe it or not, but when we get rid of the angers and the fears and the other negative energies of our feelings, we actually start feeling good. And that's what we always wanted in the first place. So we're going to poke holes in that blanket of fear like we did last week. We're going to do the same thing for anger today. There are some actually wonderful stories of how I've learned how anger can get as deeply into our lives as it does sometimes. There used to be a show on television. Robert Stack was the host of Unsolved Mysteries. I used to love that show. And one particular night, they were showing a young man who was in jail, and his grandfather had died, and he was going to be released from jail to go to the funeral. And all of a sudden, snow started coming on him, pouring down snow, like he was outside, but he was in jail. And, but it wasn't around other people. It was just over him. And this was, of course, the unsolved mystery is where's this snow and snowy weather coming from that's falling all around this young man. And they escorted him to the funeral, and he went to the meal afterwards and then was escorted back to jail. All this time, the snow was falling on him inside a house, inside the church, whatever. It was like, how is this happening? And of course, it was an unsolved mystery. Well, guess what, people? I had a similar situation. It wasn't snow. I had been teaching a class in my house one evening and had lit a candle on the stone ledge of the brick fireplace. I don't usually light candles. I don't even think about lighting them generally. So I thought, well, this is interesting. It's right there, right where the class is. I'll light the candle and we can enjoy it. And after the people left, and I thought, well, there's the candles inside this little jar. Well, in this case, it wasn't inside a jar, but it was pushed back on the ledge from the the candle was in front of some portraits I'd been painting, and they were stacked up with the candle to hold them up. And I went in to play the piano for a few minutes before I actually thought I'd blow out the candle and go to bed. All of a sudden, the fire alarm comes on. And so I rushed out to the room with the fire that had the candle. And what had happened is the candle was malfunctioning. Instead of the wick going down the center of the candle, where the pictures behind it would have been perfectly safe, the wick was going down the far side of the candle, burning the pictures that were holding up on the ledge of the fireplace, and they were inflamed and heading for the rug down below. I had a fire, and it burnt some of the rug, it burnt some of the furniture, it smoked the room so badly it had to be painted. And I went to put my hand on the phone to call the fire department. It was starting to get out of hand. I was trying to put it out. And my hand, this is one of my angel stories. My angels picked up my hand and made me hang up the phone. And they said, we'll put it out for you, which they did. I watched them put the fire out. So the next day I'm meditating, and I said, okay, what's going on with this story? And they said, well, we checked your house out very thoroughly so the fire would be not able to grow and cause any more problem than necessary. And we figured a brick fireplace with a stone ledge was probably the least likely to be a problem for fire. So you needed to release the energy of anger that your mother would not let you do artwork when you were growing up. That's how angry I was, that I had been suppressed from being able to use my creative talent in my growing up through I could have had more lessons or mother wouldn't buy me more paper for artwork. What happened? She bought me an easel, but when the paper was gone in 5th grade, I was in kindergarten, 5 years old. And she said, we can't afford more paper. And that was the end of my art at that point, 5 years old. I had one easel full of paper and that was it. So I was pretty angry. And so the anger came out in this fire. The density of the anger finally was able to release, and it caused a fire in my house. Hang on for more stories about fires. You'll be surprised at what anger can do. So I am Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails, and we are coming to you live from the BBM Global Network TuneIn Radio. And be sure and call in with your questions, 866-451-1451. Be back in a minute. I am your host, Marilyn Redmond. This is Love Never Fails, and we are coming to you live from BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. And we're learning about anger and resentments and how intense that can actually be and affect our lives. So I think you might be interested in this story. I see it as kind of funny today, but at the time it wasn't funny at all. I was heading for a convention in Las Vegas from Washington State, and my husband wanted to drive into Las Vegas with a Cadillac. He wanted to impress people. So he found a really nice used Cadillac, and we're heading off the road. And I'll tell you, it's a wonderful car for a long road trip. The only time I ever rode in a Cadillac was the ride part was wonderful, but the muffler kept going out. Now, we must have stopped along the way half a dozen times. In those days, Minus Muffler had a lifetime guarantee that if your muffler blew out, they would replace it for free. I think we put them out of business on that trip. The muffler kept burning or whatever. I don't know about cars, but you people probably know more than I do. All I know is a lot of noise, and it was a big problem, and we would always have to, every so many thousand miles, pull into another minor muffler place and get it repaired. So there would be. And as I was my turn to drive on that trip and coming through the grapevine into LA, the muffler started to go out again. And there we were in the mountains, no roads, no stores on the road, because it was a mountain and a mountainous area without any civilization, and only truckers. And we're going over the mountains, a few other cars, but it was nobody around to help us with the muffler going out. So I prayed. I said, God, get us over the mountains so we can get to a shop where they can get us another muffler. And fortunately, that happened. What I found out is our anger can affect our lives in ways we didn't even understand. The anger was so intense from my husband, it literally was blowing out the muffler, is what I later understood because of energy and how energy works. So if you're having difficulties with an appliance or your car or whatever, it could be the anger, because in my situation, that changed, of course, when he left, and he took that car with him. And he actually blew the muffler out of another car going up to Sun Valley to a conference he was going to in a different Chrysler, actually Cadillac. But he blew out the muffler again and in another car. So it wasn't just that one time. So I do know of another house fire because of anger, and a friend of mine was on a vacation, and she lit a candle. It was inside one of those glass containers, thinking, oh, well, it's going to be safe inside. This glass is there it's kind of like a container to protect the candle from causing any fire. She left to go to a movie and came back, and the condo was burned. She was staying there as a vacation. And it didn't tear down the whole building or anything, but there was a lot of repairs had to be taken care of. And of course, hopefully the insurance is going to take care of that kind of thing. So when the anger finally is ready to release, it can be very serious. And that's what I'm trying to say is anger is not just a little thing to flighty, let just pass and say, well, I'm not going to worry about that. I'll just, have another drink or however you tend to stuff your feelings, have another cookie and or another piece of chocolate. Everybody does it their own way when we stuff our feelings. So what I found out, my psychiatrist had me go get a baseball bat. And it was a Nerf ball type baseball bat. So it was spongy, and I kept breaking them with my anger, trying to pound out my anger. And so that didn't work. I was tired of replacing the bat. So I found myself a plastic bat that has never broken. I use it with my clients and I use it with me. I have a hassock or I have a mattress I can hit on. Um, and I get my anger out and scream and yell, scream at God in the ceiling. I have gone out in the car and screamed and yelled. I've gone to the out in the forest and let God know what I was thinking about that time, or to the ocean or wherever it's safe. When my husband was still in the house one day, I was really angry about something, so I screamed into a pillow. And one end of the house was a fair distance from the other end. And I went down and asked him, I said, "Oh, did you hear anything?" And he said, "No." So that's another version. You can scream into a pillow and get it out. Because you want to live currently. You want whatever's going on emotionally to be right now, but not from the past that's festered and grown and out of shape like a big inflated balloon. You want it to be current and accurate and not overblown. So one day I was needing a new fence in my house. I have a room that has a kind of a little patio around it on the outside that you can enjoy. And the fence had gotten so the point it needed to be repaired. And my friend says, "Oh, I know somebody that can help get you a new fence." So I said, "That's terrific." Well, it turned out these kids, they were in their early 20s, were wanting to make money, but they didn't know anything about a level, and they didn't know anything about making a string line so the fence was in line. And after having paid them good money, they wanted some more. And I says, "Well, I've paid you everything you said it would cost." And I went out to check what they had done again. But this time, instead of just looking at it from the front, I'd walked around the whole thing and discovered it looked more like the ocean wave. It was not in a straight line. It was a disastrous fence. Various things were wrong besides. And I was fit to be tied. And I had a rotten fence, and I'd paid this money and told the person that recommended them. So I couldn't find anybody that would, fence people didn't want to touch it. It was such a mess. I called some people for a bid and said, "Well, how much was it going to take to fix this fence?" So the fellow that recommended him came over. He was a handy person too. And he did the best he could to line it up and to get it to be as straight as possible and look like a fence is supposed to look like. And I got angry at those two young men and I blew my stack, but it was being current anger. I didn't do it gracefully because it was the first time I ever had to be angry at a current situation. And I wasn't as swift today. Now I'll do it a little more gracefully. But in those days, when you first change and learn to express these things, you don't always do them with pizzazz. That's why you might want to go to a counselor and get help with that. So I was not didn't have much finesse at that time about expressing anger. And so when I got through, I was very embarrassed with myself. I didn't normally get angry. Little girls don't get angry. And here I am blowing my stack. And they said to me, it says, "Well, Marilyn, this was current anger. This was appropriate. They didn't do what they told you they could do. And they left you in a mess. And of course, it cost you money to have to get things straightened around. So this was appropriate anger." So if you're doing something that's current anger, you're way ahead of the game, and get yourself neutral so that you're not blowing your stack like I did that day. I am Marilyn Redmond, your host, and you are listening to Love Never Fails, and we are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Well, welcome back. I am your host, Marilyn Redmond. This is Love Never Fails. We are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio, and we're talking about anger, how dense and deep and destructive it can be if you don't do something about your anger. You need to release it appropriately, because if you don't, it can cause illness, as we've referred several times on this program to Louise Hay's book, Heal Your Body. Many illnesses are caused by inflammation, and guess what causes inflammation? Anger. The first time I was aware of this, I went to a dermatologist because I was getting white pimples on my shoulder and chest. And it was kind of like they were very in bloom, let's put it that way. And the dermatologist gave me something. I went back to which the salve didn't work a bit. Nothing changed. And so she looked at it and she says, "I've never seen anything like this before." So I went home without any help, and the pimples finally went away. But I know today Alzheimer's disease has a lot of anger involved with what that's about. It's refusal to deal with the world as it is, and you're hopeless and feeling helpless. I had a family member die of Alzheimer's, and she just didn't want to face realities. She'd given up years back when her husband died and left her with 5 children. And she got herself a job where he had worked. They helped her out with a job so she could raise the kids. As the kids left, she kind of coerced the oldest boy, I'll give you the house if, when I die, if you will stay here and take care of me in my old age. So he did. He stayed there with his mom. And as she got older, she ended up with Alzheimer's into a nursing home. And to keep her in the nursing home, they had to sell the house he was promised to keep the expenses going. And so even though she'd given him this house, so to speak, as the reward for taking care of her, when you don't deal with these things, they come back and bite you in interesting ways. So the house was sold, and he was without his inheritance. And it was heartbreaking. So we talked about affirmations in a couple shows back, and here's one for Alzheimer's. There is always a new and better way for me to experience life. I forgive and release the past, and I move in joy. And in her case, she really didn't want to take responsibility when her husband passed away. She didn't want to be that grown-up person and be responsible in an adult way. So she just stayed in the past and let him take care of her. So that doesn't work very well in real life, however. So know that people with Alzheimer's can get some help. We gave her coconut oil, 3 tablespoons a day, and it did make her more lucid to visit with her, but of course it didn't cure the problem. At one point I had a session of bad breath, and I did find out that you could eat parsley. So whenever I was in a restaurant, guess what? I always ate the parsley off the dinner plate or bought some at the grocery store when I was there. And bad breath comes from anger and revengeful thoughts. And so I have to release the past with love and choose to voice only love, which I do today, hopefully. And I have, of course, not had any bad breath now for quite some time, thank you. My mother was a good example of anger that was stuffed. That's why she was mentally ill. Her paranoid schizophrenia was definitely based in anger and resentments. And she came into Bell's palsy. And it was a really sad thing to see her in that situation. Bell's palsy is a result of extreme control over anger, unwillingness to express feelings. And that's definitely what she experienced in my life. She only had about 2 or 3 comments in my whole growing up that were actually rational. She never could express her feelings. Of course, she was raised before me when nice little girls don't get angry and you don't talk about abuse and so forth. And so it was all bottled up inside of her, and it made her sick with Bell's palsy plus mental illness. So you have to tell yourself, it is safe to express my feelings. I forgive myself. My daughter's coming into carpal tunnel situations, and so I gave her the affirmation, I now choose to create a life that is joyous and abundant. I am at ease. And I told her, and she's working in the spiritual solutions to this, so now she's working on not having to have surgery for carpal tunnel, but to turn that around and get rid of her anger. And you ladies out there with cellulite, do you know that's stored anger and punishment? Tell yourself, I forgive others, I forgive myself, and I am free to love and enjoy life. The most common source of stuffed anger is depression. A pill is not going to change your feelings. It will stuff them even more. Inside you might have self-righteousness, hopelessness, and that stuffed anger is going to get worse and worse, and you're going to be in more and more darkness. And of course, it's important to get to yourself to a counselor who understands the real problems with depression. When in the 70s, women had Valium deficiencies. That's what happened to me. The doctor gave me Valium. But don't go and get pills for depression. Find a spiritual counselor who understands emotions and feelings, or a hypnotist can help you change that also. So find answers that will be more productive and helpful, because anger is really being a 5-year-old and you're throwing a temper tantrum. It ain't going your way. They didn't do what you wanted them to do the way you thought it should be done, and life ain't going the way you planned it. So I have given up anger. I have given up resentments. I don't want to be a little kid throwing a temper tantrum and making myself sick in the process. We're all growing up. Nobody is doing their life differently, because I think so. They're going to do their life the way they think it's right for them. And I really have nothing to say about how other people handle their life, because I'm a full-time job just on my own. So our emotions affect the quality of our well-being. And stay tuned as we talk some more solutions for anger. I'm Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails, and we are on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. Stay tuned for another solution. I'm your host, Marilyn Redmond. You are listening to Love Never Fails. We are coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio, and we're talking about fear and resentments, and I have some interesting solutions for you. Growing old is mandatory. Growing up is optional. Call in at 866-451-1451. We still have some time for a question or two if you call in right away. So I want to share with you one of the good solutions is forgiveness. We give up the past for a new today. And it's not because what happened to us was happy, wonderful, and terrific. You don't want to carry the burden of that emotional distress in your life for the rest of your life. So you give it up. You let it go, and you choose not to move back into the past. You choose to stay right now where you are in good hands, in a loving universe that takes care of you. And then when you're in the now, that flow of love can move through you, and you feels like you're in the grace of God. So the feelings of love surrounds you and fills you, and you have released the old negative energy so the love can fill you and actually project out towards those that are around you. So moving out of that old energy and old emotions, you forgive those people, those situations in your past, in your present, and even in your future. And forgive yourself for having needed that experience so you could change your energy into gratitude, compassion, unconditional love, and forgiveness. And when you move into that new space of gratitude, compassion, unconditional love, and of course you're in forgiveness, then you have outgrown your childish past. You no longer have fear because there's no boogeyman, and you no longer have anger because that's over with. You've grown up. There was a Dr. Hugh Lin who did Ho'oponopono. You've maybe heard of it. And his idea was to have people say, I love you. Please forgive me. I'm sorry. Instead of saying I'm sorry, I changed his comment to I take responsibility for it. And then thank that person for playing their part. When you take responsibility, you have become an adult. You have become mature. And I pretend that the people are on the stage of a theater and I'm in the audience and I stand up and applaud them. They played their part so well. I bought it hook, line, and sinker, and the play is over. This frees me to be real and to feel good in the now. We move from our head to our heart, 18 inches into maturity. I'm Marilyn Redmond. This show is Love Never Fails, and we are coming to you live from the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio. See you next week.
You've been listening to Love Never Fails with your host, Marilyn Redmond. Go beyond old ideas and understandings and hear Marilyn's solutions to healing and a higher consciousness each week here on Marilyn Redmond's Love Never Fails.